In the dead of winter, when snow covered the earth and famine loomed just outside the door, medieval farmers reached for fruits you've never tasted. Fruits so strange, so stubborn, they had to rot before they were eaten. Some could keep you alive. Others could spark war, cure a plague, or even banish evil. But then, we forgot them, all 15. Until now. Asterisk beneath the damp earth and ash-gray skies of medieval Europe, survival was not a matter of convenience. It was an ancient contract between man and nature, written not in ink, but in frost, famine, and time. While kings waged wars and priests whispered Latin prayers behind stone walls, peasants bent to the soil, coaxing life from land that often refused to give it. And when winter came, we reached for secrets. Secrets grown in orchard shadows, buried in monastery gardens, and forgotten by history. This is not a tale of noble banquets or royal feasts. It is a story of what kept the people alive, the lost fruits of Europe. Some were so stubborn they had to rot before they could be eaten. Some were used as currency, others to make ink, medicine, or weapons. And all of them, for reasons as strange as the Middle Ages themselves, were almost entirely erased from modern life. We began in the silence of winter, when even the strongest harvest fades, and the only food that remains is what the earth remembers. The first among them was a fruit with the most unfortunate nickname in history, the medlar. Even its name sounds like a riddle. Small, brown, wrinkled like a withered apple, crossed with a rosehip, kicked, not when it was ripe, but when it had just started to die. They called it open R's. No, really. That was the common term, because of how it looked. Shakespeare joked about it, a tige, too. But behind the crude laughter was a genuine miracle of winter survival. The medlar couldn't be eaten fresh, it had to undergo bleeding, a kind of intentional rotting. Once soft, it transformed into something extraordinary, sweet, rich, tasting, of cinnamon, dates, and wine, kind of medieval jam in fruit form. You couldn't grow medlars unless you knew how to wait. And the people of the Middle Ages were patient. They had to be. They harvested after the first frost, laid the fruit in straw-lined cellars, and waited for the alchemy of time to do its work. When other fruits had long vanished, the medlar was just becoming edible. But the medlar was only the first shadow. In this orchard of memory, next came a fruit whose very name feels like a ghost. The sorb apple. It's not an apple at all. Despite the name, it was more closely related to the mountain ash tree. But medieval farmers weren't botanists. They were survivalists. And what mattered was that the sorb was perfect for fermentation. Mixed with regular apples, sorbs made medieval cider that wasn't just drinkable, it was divine, sharp, tannic, deeply flavorful, with a natural complexity that no modern cider could quite replicate. Some villages in England and France became known for it. You can still find traces of them in tax records payments made in cider, not coin. Liquid wealth. There are even mentions of sorb-infused brews offered to lords in place of taxes. It wasn't just alcohol, it was sustenance, trade, and survival. But most of the trees are gone now, replaced by modern apple varieties. It's forgotten, as if flavor had never mattered. Then there was a tree so prized, it was mentioned in family wills. Service tree. Unlike the fast-fruiting trees of modern agriculture, the service tree was patient to a fault. It could take 30 years, 3 decades, before it bore fruit. But once it did, it fed generations. The fruits looked like small pears, hard as stone when first picked. But like the medlar, time softened them. Stored in straw through winter, they turned sweet, with a taste like baked apples and dates. Most importantly, they lasted. In an age without refrigeration, the ability to keep fruit edible for months was worth more than gold. Some trees were considered part of a family's inheritance. Ownership disputes over them ended up in court. Judges ruled on who got the harvest. Year by year, like sacred treasures, passed through time. This wasn't just agriculture, it was legacy. But the monks, as always, had other ideas. In the cloistered gardens of abbeys, Across Europe, another fruit quietly flourished, the cornelian cherry. It was not a cherry at all, related instead to the dogwood tree. Its blood-red fruits ripened in late summer and were treasured for their healing power. They were medicine, long before medicine had a name. Rich in vitamin C, cornelian cherries were used to fight fevers, digestive problems, and even scurvy. Monks boiled them into syrups, preserved them in honey, and recorded their uses in careful Latin script. The great Emperor Charlemagne ordered them planted throughout his empire, not for beauty, but for health. In a time when the common cold could kill, these trees were protection, and not just for the body. The wood was strong, hard enough for tool handles and crossbows. One tree could heal and defend, but while some fruits healed, others were feared. The barberry bush was once a staple of medieval kitchens. Its bright red berries added sharpness to meat dishes, much like cranberries today. But then came the curse. Barberry was blamed for causing wheat rust, a fungal disease that devastated crops, and so it was outlawed. Whole regions ripped out the bushes. The berries were banned. But here's the strange part. They were right. Barberry really does host the fungus that causes wheat rust. Centuries before germ theory, before microscopes or modern science, medieval farmers figured it out on instinct alone. But some risked keeping them anyway, planted far from fields, hidden in gardens. Because barberries had value. Their tartness balanced heavy foods, and their medicinal properties were legendary. They contained berberine, a compound known today to fight infections. In those days, it was just called healing. This quiet war between food and fear marked the next forgotten treasure, the Nespali, or loquat. Unlike the others, it did not appear when food was plentiful. It appeared when all was lost. The loquat ripened in early spring, before most trees had even begun to flower. In those final weeks of winter, when pantries were bare and the earth gave nothing, there was Nespali, gold-skinned, sweet like peaches and citrus, grown on hardy trees that defied the season. It wasn't native to Europe. It came from China, through trade routes and conquests, arriving in Mediterranean monasteries by the 10th century. And it was a symbol of wealth, of connection, of survival against all odds. To own a loquat tree in medieval Europe was to hold spring in your hand. But trade went both ways. From east to west, and west to east. One fruit journeyed across deserts and mountains to reach medieval tables, the jujube. Somewhere between a date and an apple, jujubes were tough, dried on the tree, self-preserving, practically immortal. They were the perfect travel food, carried by knights, pilgrims, and wandering monks. Nothing else could survive the long roads, the damp ships, the salt air. They were used to treat anxiety, brewed into syrups, eaten fresh and chewy, or dried and firm. Some believe they were the earliest form of medieval candy, and perhaps more importantly, they were resilient. The jujube tree could withstand drought, disease, and the Black Death, where people died. The jujube tree endured, and maybe that's the heart of this mystery. These fruits were not just food, they were adaptation, they were memory, they were tools for surviving a world that was cruel, chaotic, and constantly shifting. So what happened? Why did we forget? Modern agriculture prizes speed, uniformity, sweetness. It leaves no room for the slow, the sour, the strange, the fruits that required patience. The ones that thrived in the margins, in the corners of old gardens, in the crumbled edges of forgotten villages. But they still exist. In remote orchards, in monastery records, in DNA, in dirt, and ghostly flavor profiles. Fruits that once saved lives. Fruits that once told stories. And we're not done yet. There are still more secrets waiting in the branches. As we descend further into the forgotten orchards of medieval Europe, it becomes clear this was never just about hunger. It was about survival through ingenuity. Quiet intelligence encoded into the land by people who had nothing and yet left behind everything. Every twisted branch, every bitter berry, was a lesson disguised as fruit. And some fruits were more than food. They were currency. Take the wild service tree. Speckled brown fruit, nicknamed checkers, was once so entwined with drinking culture that medieval taverns were named after it. Ever notice how many old pubs are called the Checkers? That wasn't just coincidence. It was a nod to a fruit once more valuable than hops. Checkers weren't eaten fresh. Like the medlar, they needed to rot a little too bled before becoming palatable. But when they did, their flavor was unlike anything else. Tart with hints of raisin and spiced wine, they transformed ale into something richer, more complex, more civilized. Tavern keepers would toss fermented checkers into barrels, not only to add flavor, but to help preserve the drink. Long before pasteurization, before refrigeration, these fruits made beer safer to drink than water. In a time when sickness could come from a sip that mattered, villages even had community trees planted near gathering places or inns. During harvest, neighbors came together to collect the fruit, brew the ale, and perhaps, without realizing it, celebrate the intersection of nature, necessity, and joy. In some ways, these trees were medieval culture, standing at the center of both commerce and camaraderie. But if checkers gave warmth to the belly, another fruit offered comfort on the coldest journeys. The hackberry. It didn't look like much. Small, dark, almost dry from the moment it ripened. But the hackberry tree was a miracle of endurance. Drought, frost, fire, nothing could kill it. And its fruit, though humble, carried the secret to long-distance survival. Medieval travelers carried dried hackberries the way we might carry protein bars tucked into sacks or belts, rationed like treasure. Their mix of sugars, fats, and fiber gave the body energy that lasted, and their resilience made them a kind of living insurance policy. Some villages even planted them strategically along routes, leaving signposts that read, "Here, at least, you will not starve." It wasn't just a fruit. The trees were planted for protection, their deep roots holding soil in place, their branches offering shelter. In times of famine, when the harvest failed, the people turned to hackberries, not as snacks but as salvation. And yet, you barely speak their name now. More elusive still was a fruit that might win the title of most forgotten, the mespelisse, a close cousin of the medlar. Mespelisse was rarer, stranger, harder to classify. Its star-shaped base gave it an almost alien appearance, something out of myth more than history. Grown mainly in monastic gardens or noble estates, the fruit required specific soils, careful tending, and most importantly time. But once ripened, its flavor was described in medieval texts as honeyed wine touched with cinnamon. Poets compared it to forbidden pleasures. Nobles reserved it for feasts, and cooks turned its soft pulp into delicate preserves served only to the highest tables. Unlike most fruits, mespelisse was not meant for the market. It was a secret indulgence, whispered about more than consumed. The kind of fruit you remembered, not for how it tasted, but for what it meant. Luxury, mystery, the rare alignment of nature, and human desire. But while the mespelisse adorned noble banquets, crab apples fed entire villages. They weren't glamorous. In fact, they were nearly inedible, raw so tart they could make your eyes water. But their stubborn acidity and high pectin made them perfect for preserves, vinegars, and cider. They were the workhorse of the medieval orchard. Crab apples could grow almost anywhere. They required no pampering. When disease wiped out other crops, crab apples stood firm. When other fruits spoiled, crab apple jellies remained shelf-stable. When the cold months came, their fermented juice gave warmth to the body and a sense of normalcy to the soul. Even the wood was valuable, dense, strong, and finely grained. It was used for everything from tool handles to musical instruments. Modern apples are polished jewels. Crab apples were rough, coins, small, tough, and absolutely essential. And now they grow mostly wild, forgotten by commerce, preserved only in hedgerows and folklore. But medieval fruit was not only about food or even drink. Some were believed to protect the soul itself. The rowan tree, with its clusters of bright red berries, was not just planted, was invited. Placed near doorways, gates, and wells, it was believed to ward off evil spirits, witches, and misfortune. The five-pointed star on the base of each berry was seen as a pentagram, nature's built-in sigil of protection. Rowan berries were intensely bitter. Birds wouldn't even touch them until frost softened their flesh. But when cooked, they transformed. Rowan jam became a staple in northern households, paired with meat, stirred into porridge, and revered for its medicinal value, Thai, and vitamin C. These berries helped fight off winter scurvy. Monasteries kept them on hand for treating colds and sore throats. Folk recipes called for rowan schnapps strong, a burning drink brewed from fermented berries that was said to kill illness on contact. The logic of the age was simple. If it burns, it must be working. But the symbolism was even stronger. To grow a rowan tree was to declare war on misfortune. It was medieval security, a charm against the darkness, a signal that while the world outside might be cruel and chaotic, here, in this place, the spirits were kept at bay. Not all fruits were so revered. Some were feared for how they tasted so intensely sour they made even the rowan seem sweet by comparison. The slow fruit of the blackthorn bush was one such specimen. Small, blue-black, and jaw-clenchingly astringent, sloes were nearly impossible to eat raw. But again, the people of the Middle Ages saw potential where others saw pain. By steeping the berries in alcohol, they created something remarkable, a deep, aromatic spirit that would eventually become what we know as sloe gin. The process was slow months of waiting, as the alcohol softened the tannins and coaxed out the sweetness. But the result was worth it. A drink that warmed the belly, lifted the spirits, and reminded the people of winter's strange beauty. The blackthorn bush served other purposes too. Its dense, thorny branches made excellent natural fencing. Its wood was used for walking sticks and cudgels. Its presence marked borders both practical and symbolic. It was a plant of resilience, like the people who planted it. And then came the mulberry, not for its fruit knot at first, but for its leaves. Because in the great silk-making monasteries and manors of Europe, mulberries were planted by the hundreds to feed silkworms. Without mulberries, there could be no silk. And without silk, there could be no luxury. Landowners were legally required to plant them. Peasants were taxed if they cut them down. The trees became a kind of agricultural obligation, an economic backbone that stretched from Italy to France. But they bore fruit, too dark, rich, staining the fingers deep purple. Medieval cooks used mulberries for pies, preserves, and wine. Their juice was so deeply pigmented, it became incused in manuscripts, still legible 700 years later. A single tree, den, could give silk, food, color, and writing. The old world knew how to make everything count. But not all of Europe's fruits were native. One of the last in our journey came from far beyond its borders, yet proved crucial for the people who needed it most. The Saskatoon berry, though better known in North America. These small, blue-purple fruits were later cultivated in parts of northern Europe where few other crops could thrive. They were nutrient-dense, rich in protein, fiber, and sugar. Dried, they lasted for years, heat and fresh. They gave energy for long days of work in the fields or on the road. Some historians believe that monastic gardens in remote regions began to adopt the berry after learning of its value from early contact with northern tribes and settlers. Others argue it arrived later. Either way, it became a quiet staple of superfruit long before the word existed. One cup could sustain a farmer through the coldest hours. One handful could keep a sick child alive. In an age without doctors, nutrition was medicine. And in that context, the Saskatoon berry was a healer. These 15 fruits were more than nourishment. They were ingenuity, medicine, spirit, and survival itself. And they all vanished displaced, not by failure, but by forgetting. By the late medieval period, Europe had become a continent constantly on the edge of survival. War, plague, famine, these weren't events. They were seasons. And in the spaces between them, certain fruits stood as nature's quiet defense. Point 11. The black mulberry, the forbidden tree of silk and bloodin, the cloistered gardens of monks, and in the secret orchards of noble courts. A dark, crimson-stained fruit whispered tales from the east of black mulberry. Native to Persia and China, it made its way west along the Silk Road, and in medieval Europe, it was not just eaten, it was feared. Its blood-red juice resembled human blood, and many believed it was used in occult rites. Yet, it was rich in resveratrol, today recognized as a powerful antioxidant and during outbreaks of the Black Death. Some herbalists swore it cleansed the blood and protected the lungs. Silkworms fed on mulberry leaves, giving the tree a dual power to clothe kings and to possibly save lives. The church, however, viewed it suspiciously. It was banned in some abbeys. In others, it was grown under protection, a paradoxical relic of medicine in Mystery. 12. The wild strawberry, the fruit that wasn't for eating tinny. It's fragrant and found only in the shade of old forests. Wild strawberries weren't seen as food for peasants. Instead, they were offered in religious rituals, used in medicines, and painted in illuminated manuscripts as a symbol of purity and spiritual resurrection. But when consumed, they weren't just symbolic. They were potent, packed with vitamin C, folate, and natural anti-inflammatories. They helped fight scurvy and joint pain. In the time before doctors understood vitamins, monks believed the strawberry's tri-leaf stem represented the Trinity, and its health benefits were simply divine consequence. Still, it was never cultivated widely. Its season was short, and its fruit too fragile. The wild strawberry survived not through farming, but through folklore. 13. The sea buckthorn, fireberries of the northern cliffs in the bleak, salt-laced coasts of northern Europe. A fruit clung to life like no other. Sea buckthorn, with its blazing orange berries, grew from twisted, thorn-covered shrubs that defied the wind and frost. The Vikings harvested it for strength. Mongol horsemen fed it to their steeds for stamina. And in medieval monasteries, its oil was applied to festering wounds. It tasted sharp, acidic, almost electric on the tongue. But that bite concealed an unmatched payload: omega-7 south, vitamin E, and more vitamin C than any citrus. When famine hit, sea buckthorn was crushed into poultices, blended into gruel, or simply swallowed whole. Bitterness and all, to this day, it remains one of Europe's most powerful forgotten fruits, still growing wild, still mostly ignored. 14. The cornelian cherry, the soldier's fruit heart is wood and deep red, like a bloodstone. The cornelian cherry was never sweet, but that's not why it mattered. Roman soldiers once marched with it in their packs. By the medieval period, it grew in hedges, along manors, and in apothecaries' gardens. This fruit didn't spoil easily. Scrooby boiled into a thick, tangy jam that kept for months, or fermented into an astringent wine, said to tighten the bowels and keep soldiers from dysentery during campaigns. Some even carved its wood into weapon handles, strong, flexible, almost unbreakable, when the Crusades swept eastward. Cornelian cherries were among the few fruits that could survive the journey in. Some believed they had holy properties, capable of protecting warriors from disease and madness. 15. The medlar, fruit of death and resurrection. And finally, we return to the strange and sorrowful medlar, the fruit that defined the medieval worldview. It had to rot before it could be eaten. Once it ripened on the branch, it was still hard, bitter, and green. But if left in straw for weeks, through a process called bledding, it would soften, starken, and release a perfume like spiced apples and old wine. Only then could it be spooned out, or baked into pies, served at funeral feasts and All Souls gatherings. It became a metaphor for mortality, for patience, for hidden reward after decay. To eat a medlar was to accept life's impermanence and still find sweetness in it. Peasants ate it humbly. Philosophers quoted it. Poets used it to mock both lust and death. Even Shakespeare called it open R's, crude reference to its shape and A reminder that even the most sacred things come wrapped in dirt and death. Asterisk. This journey through forgotten medieval fruits stirred something in you. If it made you wonder, what else? We've lost time. Then, don't let this be the end. Subscribe, because every week, we uncover ancient truths buried beneath centuries of silence, secrets about survival, lost knowledge, and the world we were never meant to remember. And if this story made you feel something, leave a comment. Tell us which fruits surprised you the most, or which one deserves to grow again, and if you believe someone else should remember these forgotten gifts from the past. Share this video, because history isn't truly dead until we stop talking about it.